Why isn't anyone helping us? This is a cry we're hearing every day from Syria. As of March 2012, the United Nations says that about 5,000 civilians have been killed by government forces. On the surface, it looks like any other country that has been swept up by the Arab Spring, a ruthless government cracking down on protesters. But that narrative has been disputed. And as we've seen in Egypt, a revolution doesn't always improve the lives of the people there, particularly the Christian minorities. We're going to talk about Syria with a Syriac Orthodox priest, as well as the head of an organization devoted to helping Christians in the Holy Land. But let's not forget about the impact on the Syrian community here in Canada. Let's meet one of them, Samir Basmaji from Toronto.
Very frank with you that this bad news affecting every Syrian person, whoever in outside Syria or inside Syria, because you have a relative, you have a roots, you have your culture there, you have families. We have connection with my wife families, and I have a relative also in east part of Syria. And from time to time, mostly we are calling them and just to be sure that they are in safe and if they are okay or not. I have a relative in Aleppo, and mostly in Aleppo they don't have that big problem, only the hot area that you can say it's in Homs city and Hama city. Of course you can find here that we have different approach to the matter, but most the Syrian people here, it's in the favor of the regime, because we know what's going on there, and we know that as a Christian, we are in safe in this regime, or before this regime also, the Christian, we are in safe, and we are practicing the freedom there. But our fear that if, and big if, that the Islamic fanatic people, if they reach to the power, you don't know what's going to happen. And that uncertainty keep us always worried. And there's a fear about that one.
Joining me now in studio is Father Estephanos from St. Barsalmo Syriac Orthodox Church, as well as Carl Hétu, the National Director of the Catholic Near East Welfare Association. Thanks very much for joining us. Now, we tend to group the revolutions of the Arab Spring all as one development together. What is unique about the situation in Syria, and what are some of the different factions involved? If you could begin, Carl.
Well, if we go in Egypt, or in Tunisia for that matter, it started from an uprising from the people. It was not a religious movement, it was not fanatics, it was just people that had enough of dictatorship and oppression, people that wanted to live in dignity. If you go in Syria, you have a different thing that happened. Yes, there was an uprising of civilians, but the thing in Syria is you have a minority government, the Alawites, that belongs to the Shiites, the big Shiites family, Muslim family.
Okay.
They're the minority. They represent about 12-15% of the population. And the majority there are the Sunni, that represents about 60-65. And then you have the Christians, that represents about 10-15%, depending who you talk to and the various things. But nevertheless, the idea is what's been happening in Syria versus Egypt or Tunisia is in those two countries, the majority of the people are Sunni, Muslims, or they're Christian. And Christians and Sunni were in the streets against a dictator in Egypt.
Okay.
In Syria, it was not exactly what happened.
How are the factions being broken up in Syria? It's the Christians and the Alawites who are together, and the Sunnis are mostly consisting of the protesters?
Yes. The Sunni would be part of them, not all of them would be protesting against the regime. It is part of them which believed by Syrians and all of us as even Christians that it is intervention from the West and not people who just came up with the idea. I think the West or other countries have made use of their rejection to the regime to bring about some terrorist acts and attacks and so forth.
Now, Father, tell us a little bit about the Christian community, because your church is actually based, the headquarters are in Damascus, is that right?
Yes, the Syrian Orthodox Patriarchate located in Damascus, together with the Antiochian Orthodox and the also Melkite Catholic Church. their headquarters are all in Damascus within the same area. And of course, Syria has a great history for Christianity, and Al-Assad declared that Syria is the spring of Christianity. Yes, yes. So the president of Syria declared on TV that the Christians and Christianity sprang from Syria to the whole world. So there is that honor and recognition of the Christian significance into Syria.
And now what are we hearing from the local Christian community in Syria? Because the patriarch is located in Syria. What's he been saying about the conflict?
The patriarch has written a letter together with the rest of the patriarchs, actually, who represent the heads of Christians in Syria. They wrote a letter, and it was very balanced, first of all.
Okay.
They were not asking people to support the president, for example. They just claimed our patriarch was inviting people to, and the government, to bring more awareness about our culture and our sense of belonging to a nation, and put apart all the religious differences and not take use of that to split the country. And he, and together with the rest of the patriarchs, emphasized over the unity and invited the president also to open his ears and listen to his people and practice equality and not to deny any legal rights for any person, regardless of their opinion or faith in Syria. So it was a call for tolerance, for unity, and it was a condemnation also to the external influence over Syria. So all the Christians condemn any influence from outside. They do believe that Syria can solve its problems as they all hold on to their national sense as being Syrians.
Now, I'm going to ask you a little bit later about those external influences and who those are. But Carl, how would that message compare with what we're hearing from the Catholic Church and from the Vatican?
Well, the nuncio of Syria,
so the diplomatic representative
of the Pope in Syria, has talked about the role that Christians can play in Syria. And of course, that role is a role of, exactly as was expressed by Father, in terms of playing a diplomatic role, a role of peace, of reconciliation. And there's no way out of this. This conflict, if it continued the way it is, will go massively into a civil war. And that's where people are really worried about it. The Pope,
a civil war between the Sunnis and the Alawites and the Christians, you're saying?
Yes, and within the Sunni themselves.
Right.
Because the Sunni are not one voice.
Divided.
They are divided. You have the Salafi there, you have the Brotherhood, Muslim Brotherhood, the same two groups that you find in Egypt that are fighting things out as well. And they don't like each other too much. Even though they will work together temporarily on certain causes, they do not like each other. And so, and there's other groups, other forces from Saudi Arabia, from Iran, from Lebanon, who knows who else, maybe even outside of that, as far as Russia maybe, that could interfere in the life and the daily life of what's going on. And that's why the Holy Father just recently actually also called for a ceasefire, the call for the peace, the dialogue. We need to sit down somehow, somewhere, to dialogue this. Does the Assad government wants to do that, or it wants to crush once and for all the rebellion? Well, let's face it, it's been a year. They've not been able to crush it. And even though they're going with massive bombardment right now in Homs, where Christians are fleeing there with thousands of other people that are innocent civilians, it's not being crushed. And so that means that we're in for another 6 months to a year to 2 years of battling. It will not be sustainable. And so that's why the call of the church, I think, is very important at this moment. It positioned the church in Syria to saying, let's take a leadership role, let's talk to the Sunni, let's talk to the Alawites. You have to sit down and talk. If not, it will end up into a sectarian war. There's no doubt about it, and it's already moving in that direction.
So do you think that there's a common Christian message, a common Christian voice that's being expressed?
Absolutely, we do see that very clearly. Although we have a few Christians, some would be in Syria, very few, and few among the immigrants in Canada, and I've been in the Netherlands a few days ago. I've seen some people would oppose the regime, yet would totally disagree with the terrorist acts that are representing the fanatic Muslims, the Muslim Brotherhood, and so forth. So they seek a change, yet an official change, not by force.
Right. We can all agree what we don't want that change to become.
Yes.
Now, I want to speak to both of you about whether you think that the Arab Spring will ultimately help or hurt Christians. But first, part of the religious response to these issues is taking place in Rome. The Pope is preparing a document in response to the Synod of Bishops on the Middle East that took place in 2010. And in the meantime, the community of Sant'Egidio is taking an interfaith approach. We'll hear about their efforts in a moment.
Let us know your perspective. Email us at perspectives@saltandlighttv.org or reach us by mail, Perspectives at Salt and Light Television, 114 Richmond Street East, Toronto, Ontario, M5C 1P1, or call us toll-free at 1-888-302-7181. Let your perspective be heard.
Christian and Muslim leaders in interreligious dialogue, as well as politicians from throughout the Mediterranean, met at the community of Sant'Egidio this morning to talk about the Arab Spring movement and how to support its goals of bringing democracy and full freedom to the Middle East.
Life under dictatorships is miserable for all. People were deprived from democratic participation. Muslims, Christian, men and women were deprived. And those dictatorships, at least some of them, enjoyed support in the Western world. And I think it's important now to have a shift of our attention to the people who are asserting their right to be more free and to take their own destinies in their hands.
Back in studio with Father Estephanos and Carl Hétu from CNEWA Canada. Now, some are saying that the Arab Spring is more like a Muslim winter, that the revolutions are putting in place a Sunni majority that could harm the Christian minorities in the population. Do you think that this is a valid concern, Carl?
Yes and no. What happened is once again, the spring itself, the revolt itself, was started not by religious, but by civilians.
Okay.
And so, yes, later on, some of the religious groups that are organized, like in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood, for example, is trying to recuperate it and to run in office, and they've won the majority of the seat last time. The Salafi won 24%, which is the radical branch. But that's because there's a vacuum of political options. And let me tell you what I hear in Egypt or Tunisia, and you saw in Tunisia what happened not long ago. People were in the streets, the same people that rallied to get rid of the dictator also rallied to tell the Islamists that are the government, we will not take other oppression. Same thing will happen in Egypt. And so, no, I'm not ready to say that you will see a rise of it. We have to be observant. But the Muslims that will take power, wherever they are, they have to face the same issues that the people are demanding: social equality, the level of democracy, and some economic balance. And people will not tolerate that. So it's why many believe Egypt, for example, will be in turmoil for a few years to come before things settle down a bit. And as for the Christians, well, Christians are also civilian. They also went in the streets in Egypt. They also want their position. And it is a very important moment for the Christians to speak loud and form alliances with Muslims, which they are doing, in order to form political parties, to also speak loud. In the meantime, yes, there's other forces that are attacking them, like we see in Egypt. There's been a lot of people that are being killed, properties destroyed, but at the same time, there's great hope for Christians in Egypt. But it can swing one way or the other at this moment. Nobody knows.
Would you agree that it's too soon to tell whether this will ultimately be beneficial for the Christian people?
We don't see unless the regime remains, because the threat is not made by the Sunnah themselves directly, rather than by the political parties, such as the Fanatic and the Muslim Brotherhood and so forth, who had attempts actually also in the 1980s and were faced by Hafiz al-Assad, the late president. We don't see any good news in what is happening. We don't see that this is Arab Spring. We see it is actually a doom and a dark age, a dark time, and whatever is happening, based on what we have seen in Iraq, it was not at all to the benefits of Christians. Churches were destroyed, Christians had to flee, over 75% had to immigrate, There's no more freedom. There is always a threat in Iraq. Likewise, in Egypt, the situation is becoming more threatening. So we don't see that this is the outcome of the Arab Spring leads to the benefit of Christianity at all.
And certainly Iraq is the worst case scenario involved. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood, is this one of those external forces that the Patriarch seemed to be alluding to in his letter?
It is both from inside the country and outside the country. There are a group of Muslims, Sunnah, who have some grudges against the regime, and especially against the late president, the previous president, the father of al-Assad, who really had destroyed their city as they led a riot against the government, which was really a terroristic act.
Okay, so there's long-standing historical
there is something to support their agenda. Yet we do see that it is not purely a Syrian reaction. There have been weapons brought into Syria. There are plans and support from outside, coming from neighboring countries and
like
various
Saudi
countries.
Arabia, where's
so
this coming
Saudi Arabia, through Libya, through Lebanon. Although the official government in Lebanon does oppose that and try to prevent that. From Turkey, there is also imported weapons to destroy Syria. And there have been plans, actually proves that this is nothing new. It has been pre-planned a long time ago, and just now got the chance to appear.
To finally erupt.
Yes, yes.
Now, it's expected that the Pope is going to be releasing a document on the Middle East as a result of the Synod of Bishops on the Middle East that happened back in 2010. And it's rumored that the Pope might even be going to Lebanon this fall, depending on the situation in the Middle East. Do you think there's a growing awareness of the plight of Christians in the Middle East?
Well, if you're talking about Canada, Canada is very far away from the Middle East. So if you go in Europe, you'll see the opposite. In Canada, the more and more we talk about what's happening in the Middle East outside of the main media, that always give a very light view of what's happening in that complexity that is the Middle East. I would say that in general, 10 years ago, people wouldn't really know that Christians in the Middle East existed, or Arabs were maybe all Muslims.
Okay.
You know, I see that a lot. What do you mean, Carl? Arabs are Christians? That cannot be. They're Muslims. And I said, no. Arabs were Christians before they became Muslims. You know, people forget that. Sometimes people believe that Islam started before Christianity. It's not the case. So yes, there is an increase of awareness because of all the work that's being done, the church organization, the Pope speaking out, the Synod, the bishops of Canada, everybody speaking out a lot about what's happening over there. And I think it came through the plight of Iraqi Christians.
Okay.
What are Chaldeans, Syrian, Syriac? So that brought a lot of awareness, and thanks for the great work of now Cardinal Collins, who worked really hard in bringing families here in Canada, in Toronto in particular. It had allowed now the Latin Church here in Toronto and in many other cities to finally welcome Syriacs and Chaldean. We did not know you existed. Tell us more about it, right? And right, Father, we were at the conference where we saw things happening, and people are now starting to say, wait a sec, they're our brothers. They're the one that sacrificed everything so that today we're here in North America expressing ourselves freely because of their sacrifice. And their sacrifice still is today.
And so the situation in Iraq put Christians in the Middle East on the radar.
If you allow me, I'd like also to add a comment. I totally agree with what Carl has been saying. But I do think that this awareness of the Christian presence in the Middle East is more of a church level rather than a political level. It is not like, for example, United States did care less when they went to Iraq. Christians were massacred, and America did not protect them at any level. And the immigration that provided Canada, provided for the Christians, an acquaintance between the Catholic bishop and James, the minister of immigration, who did a great help, actually, which is so highly appreciated by all of us. But they're supporting Christians who have left Iraq and took refuge in Syria and neighboring countries. Yet as for Christians themselves inside the country, they had been very neglected, totally neglected.
Now we're all out of time. It's time for our last words now. And we're going to turn to Paul's letter to the Romans. Romans chapter 8, 35 and 37. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or the sword? No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. Your thoughts, Father Stephanos?
We strongly believe that there is a sovereign God.
Yeah.
And prior to that, a few verses before, he said, we know that all things work for good for those who love Christ. At this time, we call all Christians in the Middle East to just lift their hearts and all people to raise their hearts and look upon a mighty God who is the only true source of love and peace and tranquility in the Middle East. We will never give up our faith and trust in the Lord. We do trust that God's plans are greater.
Carl?
It's always intriguing why God decided to have Jesus be born in that region. 2,000 years ago, it seems that through the scriptures, that his words then, as it is today, are as vibrant and credible as they ever was. And this world of reconciliation cannot happen if there's no forgiveness. And I think, when we look at the world we're living today, if it can work in the Middle East and in Syria, then it can work everywhere else on that planet.
That's a wonderful message. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Father Stephanos
Thank you,
from
Kris.
St. Barselmos Syriac Orthodox Church here in Toronto, and Carl Hétu from the Catholic Near East Welfare Association. Now, this is a really complex issue, and we invite your comments and your questions. You can do so by going to our Facebook page, and you can find that by going to our website at saltandlighttv.org. Thanks very much for watching.